go on to the Zoom now and speak to Professor Patrick Esuming, who is joining us from the University of Ghana. I'm grateful to you, Prof. Now, so the World Bank is also looking at the impact of inflation on a household income. And you saw there that if I receive, say, 1,005, I'm losing more than 1,000 cedis. If I receive 2,005 and I'm losing more than 1,000 cedis through inflation, how can households then really manage their affairs? What can we do?
Good evening and good evening to viewers. So first of all, let me start by saying, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me. Yeah. So you introduced me as a professor. I have to say, maybe you are professor.
Yeah, it's a doctor.
So,
Dr. Patrick.
I'm so Dr. Patrick.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, I think food inflation is a big problem because we know that poor people spend a higher fraction of their incomes on food. So when food prices are rising, the rate that we have been seeing in recent times is quite problematic, I think. But we need to understand the inflation number that you read, the 42.5. That is from June 2022 to June 2023.
Yeah.
So it means that if your income has stayed the same, then from last year, then it means that that's how much your income has lost. It's lost almost half of the value.
Yeah.
And we know that in the recent period, even though inflation has been running away, wages haven't kept up. So I think that's the sense in which we see that wages are being eroded away by the current bout of inflation that we are having. So yeah, that is expected because, again, like I said, we know that poor people spend a higher fraction of their incomes on food. So when food prices are rising, ordinarily you would think that many poor people should be net producers of food, so they would have benefited. But if you look at the pricing structure of food in this country, when food prices are rising, it doesn't necessarily mean that the producers of food are the ones receiving the higher prices. Because of the pricing structure, people will go to buy from the farm gate at lower prices and then come and add transportation costs, and then the middlewomen and middlemen are the ones who tend to benefit a lot more.
So really, Professor Doku, as you heard in the report, is asking for employers to pay their employees well. In this instance, how do we deal with it? Because food prices are going up. We are not being paid much. How can households then manage?
So specifically about the need for employers to pay their employees well. Yeah, for sure. You have to understand that, as an economist, the way I look at it is that pay is related to productivity. So, your employer cannot be paying you over and above what you are bringing to the value you are bringing to the company. So I think that one is very important.
But Prof, we are in an economy where even when the employee is productive, because the salary is not tied into how productive you are, and if you are on one level of a salary, that's what you take until there is an increment of a sort.
So, in the private sector, people, your task is defined. So the productivity is embedded. Your task is defined. And you notice that sometimes when people exceed their expectation, then they get paid a bonus, for instance. So that is where the productivity and the pay is going hand in hand. I think in the public sector, though, sometimes it's a little bit different because the wages are negotiated. Even though the underlying driver should be productivity, sometimes it doesn't come out clearly. So sometimes you see, especially there's been concerns about the productivity of the private sector. Of the public sector. We have to understand that we have to disaggregate which components of the public sector people work. So obviously some if we are working based on paying based on productivity, you get a sense that some people in the public sector will probably should be receiving higher wages. But I think the problem we tend to have is that usually the wages tend to increase across the board without really focusing on the relative contribution and the productivity. So it's good that, obviously the workers have to be sufficiently well paid to be able to, enjoy some good health, very good nutrition, to be very productive. So it goes hand in hand. I mean, in economics, there are some theories that say sometimes the pay should precede the productivity, with the expectation that over time the worker will pay up. But you can't discuss the pay and leave out the productivity. It always has to go hand in hand.
Okay, but how do we deal with food inflation really in this country? A country that is expected to grow more food, but we are being battered by inflation here and there. How do we keep it under control?
So there are several things across the whole chain, from the production chain to the distribution chain. There are problems all over that requires substantial investment. If you start with the production chain, one of the reasons why food prices have increased, especially since last year, is the input prices have become very expensive. Start with fertilizer. I think since sometime last year, government's fertilizer subsidy program has been in problems. So it means that fertilizer prices have gone up, seedling prices have gone up, and then other input costs have gone up. So that means that the farmers are not able to produce as much. So that's one problem. Then we also have real problems with the distribution chain. So for some of the perishable ones, we don't have enough storage equipment and the storage at closer to the farms. And then also we have problems with the distribution, the road infrastructure and the rail infrastructure linking the production units to the distribution units. So you see that a component of the higher prices we are seeing now has to do with transport prices that have gone up and the fuel prices that have gone up. And then a component has to do with the actual cost of producing food that has gone up. Mm-hmm. So it means that you need investments across all these chains, starting from making sure that we invest in more creditably in irrigation so that we can have more farming, more months of farming. That's there. Then also ensuring that the farmers are getting cheaper inputs and cheaper credit to, especially fertilizer and then other things. Then also investing a lot more in the road infrastructure, linking the core food production regions to the consumption places. So we need to invest across the entire chain. But we know that this is not going to happen.
Exactly.
Even if you did that investment today, the food prices will stay high for a while, unfortunately.
Now, government in the last year or so decided to then be cutting food from the farm gate to the market centers. Is that a strategy that we should explore in a wider perspective to see how it could reduce inflation, food inflation, or this is something that is not sustainable, and so we shouldn't look at that as a way of solving this food inflation issue?
I don't see that strategy being sustainable. I mean, first of all, how many people live in Accra and how many people can go to the Ministry of Agriculture and buy those foods? I think there are fundamental problems. So, that's just scratching a bit part of the surface of the problem. Okay. There are fundamental problems. So that there are problems with the distribution channel. So why don't you solve that particular problem and then say you are going to cut some from some places? First of all, you can't send food, every type of food stuff to that place. And then you really don't want people coming there. Then you have to think about what you are doing to private sector people who are investing in the food distribution chain. So I don't think that's any strategy that we should be thinking about.
So how do you solve the distribution challenge then?
So, there are different things. I think the first thing that will help is if the road networks were better, that will help. Because one problem is that at the same time that sometimes we are struggling with food in the major urban centers, you go to the rural areas and then food is there rotten. Mm-hmm. So I think, improving the road infrastructure will ensure that more private transport owners may be willing to invest in, those large trucks that will help cut the food. And then you solve the cost of sending the food from those places here. So I think, we have to look more into the infrastructure if the road is not sustainable and you want to think about rail or other sources, but those are all long term. But clearly, in terms of the distribution, we have to start with that. Because if the roads are good, if people you should go to some of the places where the food comes from. You know, the road is so bad, when it rains, the car just stuck, and for days they can't come. And all of that will increase the cost of bringing the food to the urban places. So I think we should definitely look at those kind of investments.
Okay. Prof, I'm grateful to you for joining us here on The Pulse. Dr. Patrick Esuming is an economist speaking to us.